Hey everyone, welcome to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast with your hosts, Russell Martin and Brent Aiken. We are glad you're joining us today, and we hope you find these conversations helpful, insightful, and encouraging as you lead your students in ministry. We wanted to stop and remind you about our social media. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook by searching @TalkStudentMen. And then you can also check out our website, www.studentministryconversations.org. Today, we are going to hear a conversation that Russell had with Colleen Russell. Colleen is one of Russell's former youth ministry assistants, and he is going to talk with her about the ins and outs of helping on staff in ministry. Now, Russell, this is your conversation. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yes. So Colleen was in my youth group, and as a student, she had a gift of organization and a servant's heart and a willingness to help and to step up. And so kind of like you said in one of your previous episodes about student ministry leadership, I gave her the opportunity. I gave her the ability to use her gifts and her leadership roles, and that led to her being a paid youth assistant for me and at another church. And then she has moved on to be a director of Next Gen Ministries at some churches since then. So we kind of talk about what it means to fill that role of a youth ministry assistant, or however you label it, how it's much more than being organized. And then she shares some very practical tips that she has come up with along the way. So I hope you enjoy this conversation, and I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. So without further ado, here's Russell's conversation with Colleen.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast. My name is Russell Martin, and I am glad to be joined by Colleen Russell. And I've known Colleen for many, many, many years. And seen her as she's grown up through my youth group, and then went on to do ministry herself. But I'm not going to tell you a ton about her. I'm going to let her introduce yourself. So, Colleen, tell us kind of where you've come from, where you are now, how you got here. You can be, 1 minute, or you can give us the full long story.
My name is Colleen, and I met Russell at my home church at Williams Memorial in Texarkana. He was actually my youth director. And I was able to serve as his youth assistant unofficially in high school, and then officially for some summers in college. And I graduated from Texas A&M with a degree in public health, which is totally related to youth ministry. And then I started as a full-time youth director at Pollard UMC in Tyler, and I just moved to White House UMC in White House, Texas.
Yeah. And so, yes, we did. Colleen helped, and actually I'll let you tell some of those stories, but Colleen helped just kind of us recreate the youth program where we were. And so just kind of as you've been in that assistant role in unofficially, like you said, and officially, first of all, like, why did you step into that unofficially? Like, why did you, as a sophomore, because I remember I kind of gathered some of y'all together and I said, hey, we are rebuilding a youth program. You can leave and go somewhere else while we do this, or you can jump in. And one of the things that you and a couple others said were, okay, we're with you, let's go. And so what made you step into that?
Well, I think when we had discussions about starting a youth group, my talents at the time weren't really in public speaking or that side of things, but I knew that I was a really organized person and I was good at behind the scenes work. And I didn't realize that is just as important to youth ministry as the actual day of events. And so just taking a step back and realizing how much of the planning happens beforehand, and how if the planning and the organizing before isn't done right, then the event won't happen.
So, and you stepped into that. I remember we were going on a trip, and I hadn't sent out an agenda yet. So, and you can tell on me, I don't mind if you're like, hey, Russell wasn't organized and I knew he needed this. But that's just one of the things that sticks up in my head is we were going on a trip to a winter thing in Branson, I believe. And you said, hey, do you have an agenda? So do you remember that?
I do remember that. I don't like the unknown. That's one of the things I'm not good with. And so when I asked if you had a hour by hour itinerary and you said no, I was like, that's something I can fix. And so we even had it down to the restaurants, and we ate at that crazy chicken themed restaurant. That's one of my favorite memories. And, just to know that, like, even as a student, I was a part of it. And it was like, I made a lot of connections with people, asking them like what they were interested in stuff. And so that was an easy way for me to feel valued during that trip too.
Well, that was one of the things that we've talked about. And we've had several podcasts on here talking about empowering students. I mean, Brent just did one a couple of weeks ago on empowering students to lead. And one of the things that I think was important about that was you weren't going to get up and sing at that point. You weren't going to get up and speak at that point. That wasn't what you're called. But a lot of times when we say help in the church, we're always focusing on those who can sing, those who can play, those who can be part of worship. But you had all these talents and abilities that you found the place for you to fit in within that. So, so as you've helped you did serve as a summer youth assistant. What have you learned through that process? Like, what have you learned? What are some of the key things, takeaways, positive, and what are some of the key things that maybe were hard during being not the first person in charge, but being the one who's taking care of all the other stuff?
I think one thing I did have a little different experience is it was my home church. And, that was kind of strange and sometimes hard to see all the behind the scene things. But I think one thing sometimes it was a struggle is like having like a clear plan of what the youth assistant's responsibilities were. Because I think like sometimes I thought things were my job and they weren't. And so I spent time on something that already been done, or sometimes I didn't do something because I didn't know it was my part. And so having those clear guidelines of what you want your youth assistant to do. And then I think one thing working with you, Russell, is like you knew my strengths. And so just like knowing stuff I was good at, and then also knowing stuff that you struggled with, like organizing and trip planning. That was really good because I knew like going into it that was stuff I needed to put extra time in it. So like I wasn't frustrated when those things weren't done because I knew going ahead that was an area that I was really going to be needed in. And I did learn how much of youth ministry is really behind the scenes. As in a youth group, you just showed up and you played the silly games and had the Bible study and ate dinner and then you left, but you didn't realize that those silly games take planning. I didn't realize how hard it was to get people to bring a meal. And so making those connections with church members was something that I had to learn throughout the process.
So what were some of the joys within that?
The joys was getting to meet the students, but also meeting church members that I wasn't that close with beforehand, because I found that a lot of church members like me, they might not want to be in front of people on Sundays or on the events, but they have a lot of talents too that can happen behind the scenes. So finding that group of people behind the scenes, and then also like watching myself grow in confidence. When I first started, like I like to hide behind the scenes, but working like with the students and making a relationship first, I felt way more comfortable stepping out of behind the scenes and being in front of them and leading the games I planned, leading the trips and stuff.
So we'll probably do a little more thought ideas and maybe philosophical things, but I want to get real practical real fast. And so let's say that we are going on a trip, one of the trips. So what I see or what parents see is, we're meeting at this time and going and doing this trip. But if we're going to like church camp per se, what all do you think about? What all goes in your head? Because what I know is I could say we are going to, or a youth leader, we'll get out of just you and me, but a youth leader could say, hey, I want to do this trip to camp. And in your mind, I feel that there are all of a sudden 1,000 things fire off, and things that I wouldn't even think of. So what if I said, hey, Colleen, we're going to church camp. What all, can you kind of just go down, and you may not get all of them, but what all goes off in your head as far as what do you start thinking about immediately? And then how do you take that through to the day of leaving for camp?
I think I always think about it as, normally with trips, you'll take a kid who might never have any relationship with your youth group, or their parent doesn't know you. And so you have to think of things as someone who has no idea. So, for kids who have been there forever, church camp is easy. You just say you're going to church camp, drop them off at this time, pick them up at this time. But then you have some parents who have no idea, what happens at church camp or anything. So I like to start with making sure all of the reservations and the payment for the actual camp are done first, because if you mess that up, then what's the point of the trip? So starting out having and finding one person at the place you're going that you have like a personal connection with, getting a number and an email for that person. And also, like, if you're running late or there's an emergency, you have a way to contact one person easily. And then starting with the permission slips and the liability forms for the students going. And one thing is like finding out your church's policy on that. I worked at churches where online forms are acceptable, where they have to be a paper form, they have to be notarized, they don't have to be notarized. And then also making sure you have the specific paperwork for the place you're going. Because, sometimes they'll take your liability form, but sometimes they ask their own. And then for payment, I always like to have payment due before the trip, just because you don't want to add that stress to the morning of. So then after all the official stuff is behind, I like to make an itinerary for the parents and for the kids about what time we're leaving, letting the parents know what kind of transportation. Will they be in someone's personal car? Will they be in a church van? Sending that information out. And then having a contact number for the parents to reach in case of an emergency. And I know sometimes for places you're going, that might be a landline, and letting them know, your kid will or will not have their phone, what the service will be like for the adults. And then after that, I kind of get to the fun stuff, especially for traveling with junior high kids and younger. I think it's important that you let them know the restaurants are. So if they need to bring cash or whatever, that can happen. And then letting them know what the return home plan is. Do we have a set time we're leaving? Do we have different times that we could be home? And having a working cell phone number for all kids. As a youth director, there's kind of nothing worse than being gone on a 7-day trip and you get home and you have a kid who you can't get in contact with the parent because you're ready to go to sleep. And so getting that information down. So, and I normally have a rule that we let the parent know as soon as we leave the place. So allowing as much time as possible to get it done. And that's just for a church camp trip, to where the weekly itinerary is already set and, we'll be at one place. I think it's very different if you're going to a trip where you change every day. And then I don't think the parents necessarily need every single detail. I do have that available, but just, on Tuesday, this is our big event. On Wednesday, this is our big event. Just having that information, because you'll have some parents who won't talk to you until you drop their kid off. And then some parents who want a minute by minute update.
That there is just a checklist that we can just post up and go through. Any of those cause any, what do you worry about the most on that? I guess probably the beginning parts, is that why you get those things done ahead of time? The church's policy and the permission slips and those?
Mm-hmm. Because that's the most important part to me. And to me, about a kid having more information is better than less information, because you do never know what could happen, especially, with COVID, we got into a lot of like privacy issues and can we give your kid a test or not? So if you have all of that in writing, then that just makes, because emergencies can be stressful anyway. So having all of that and being able to have a physical copy with you that you're able to show whoever's needed is really important.
So if a church has a youth assistant going on a trip though, so how do you handle that as far as you're going to the trip and you get there and you have a youth director and you have somebody, because I kind of relied on y'all for a lot of those things. So kind of tell me a little bit about your ideal relationship, like on a trip, like going on one of those things? Like, what are some of the things that you take care of so that the youth leader can take care of something else?
I think I'm going back to having like clear description of what is my job as a youth assistant and what will be handled as the head assistant. And so I know when I worked for you, a lot of that was me. Like I would have the magic folder of everyone's liability forms. And I would always keep up with the check because you would lose the check. And so that was like one clear thing is I had that. And then, for our relationship, I, as the female, I would be staying in the female cabin or the female hotel room or however that was set up. And then you would be more in charge of the males. So I think that was like a good thing to have, one of each gender, just when traveling places, being able to stay in the separate dorms. And then just knowing that like while we are there, what needs to be done, different like updating social media was something that I did. Because that's just something that was on my mind. And so posting pictures, updating parents on things, that's something I could do that allowed you more freedom. And then I think too, just letting your youth assistant like enjoy the event also. Like there was a lot of duties that I had, but I also got to try out new things and be with the kids and really discover, if youth ministry was with me. And so knowing that your youth assistant like is there to help you, but also I didn't just do administrative work the whole time because that way I could figure out youth ministry for myself. And then also since most youth assistants are summer college students, letting them have a fun summer too.
I think that was important thing obviously you can have somebody who's helping you who has no desire to be in ministry or do that. But if you do have someone who at least is discerning, it's a great discipleship opportunity and it's safe to be able to be like, hey, we're on a trip, you do this, or a Bible study and you do this, and saying, giving those opportunities to help. So one of the things that I mentioned or talked to about you is what are some of the things that you would share for someone who feels led to be in ministry? Is there a difference between, hey, I feel called to be a youth ministry assistant, or is that also a good step? And we talked about it a little bit, but is it a good step for someone who's testing it out? Or, what are some things you would share for someone who feels led to be in ministry, maybe not in the role of a director, but a ministry assistant?
I think first I would say like just do it. No matter like what your age is or where you are in that call, youth age kids, like, they're gonna help you like make that decision. And like for me, it came pretty fast. Like I fell in love with the whole process pretty fast. And so, a lot of times youth kids, like they're brutally honest with you. And a lot of times, they'll bring up stuff that you were trying to avoid, but they do it in such a loving way. That's really just a unique experience. And like especially in the summer, when you're at camp with them and you're there, like you're in youth ministry, like 24/7, I feel like you really get that answer, but also like to talk to your youth director about all of the possibilities. Even now as a full-time youth director, I'm always like pushing really hard to get those camp counselors and to get the people that are up front. But I've also realized like I need the behind the scenes people. I need those van drivers. I need the people to call people, to send out postcards. So ask your youth directors, say, this is the list of things I'm good at. And I promise you that they can find a way to use those strengths.
Yeah. So not everybody, obviously we're talking to many churches who are themselves part-time as a youth leader. But all these things still have to happen. And even in some of those situations, it's even more needed because you have somebody, I know our youth leader is bivocational. And so he spends his time working during the day and then in the evening does youth things. So how could they find the same assistants without hiring not having the budget to hire somebody to do that, what are some of the ways that you could encourage them and also volunteers to kind of help fill that role?
I think it's important, to like see what also your students are good at. Like when I was in the youth group, there was always a sign-up sheet for the youth band, and there was a sign-up sheet to do the sermon, but there wasn't a sign-up sheet to do the behind-the-scenes stuff. So, approach your students and see what they're interested in, and then like put those things out for your volunteers. Say like, I need help with this. And to me, like I found too, like if you just give them like just for 2 weeks, I need someone to do this. And then they come for 2 weeks and they realize they fall in love with it, and then we'll do it further. And then two, I had a lot of success with like finding local college students who maybe need volunteer hours for an organization they're in. And so they come to do those volunteer hours, but then they build those relationships, and they've been some of my best volunteers. And, even if you can't pay them, Chick-fil-A and Starbucks gift cards go a long way.
Yeah. Going back to really practical, what are some of if you have a list of tips or tricks, and this could be 10, this could be, just a rambling on of lists, but what are some of the, first of all, let's start with apps and programs. Like, what are some of the apps and programs that you utilize in ministry to help stay organized?
I think for me, having a calendar that you share with your team, I use just Google Calendar for that. But that way, like people can put like their personal like vacation time on there too. You can have all your youth event, and then that way too, you can also invite people to that calendar or just certain parts of the calendar. And then one thing working with Russell is we use Trello, and Trello was a app for organizing, and you can actually make like for church camp, and you can make a little checklist that says like permission slips. And once you've had everyone's permission slips, you can check that off. So that's something we use too. And then Remind 101, we always had like an important Remind 101 message that was kind of like, do not ignore these messages. And then a separate account that sent out like daily Bible verses, which things we didn't want you to ignore, but parents knew like, if it came from this message, like, please look at it and know it's important.
Okay. And how did you do you were a spreadsheet person?
Yes.
So do you use like Google Sheets for that, or?
Yeah, I use, I like anything in the Google Suite, just because it's easy to share with people. And then, no matter if you're on your personal computer or a computer somewhere else, you can still access it. So that always worked better for me. And then just writing everything down. And then one thing, like anytime I went on a trip, at the end of it, I was always make notes of things I would have done differently, or things that we found out at the camp. Like the kids had to have only $1 bills, or they had to have a certain swimsuits, for different things.
And that way I was there for the file for the next time.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So what other tips or tricks that maybe not apps, but what are some other things? There's 1,000 of them that you do, and they're in your mind. But if someone else came and said, hey, I'm going to be a youth ministry assistant, what are the inside things that I need to know?
I think one thing that I didn't realize till the end of my first year was connecting with other youth assistants, because I met them like throughout camp. And so I didn't really make that relationship till the end of the summer. So, if it's where Facebook has so many pages now for different things. And so finding other people who are youth assistants, and then just like really getting to know your youth director will like really help that relationship. More like practical tips and tricks is I would write everything down. Anytime a parent called and asked any questions, I would write all of that down. Because, it also made you think about if that parent's asking a question, like I bet other parents have that questions. And then like I would keep notes about like what students were interested in and events they had going on, because that was like an easy way to connect with them further. So I just had like sticky notes and binders of information about trips and things we were going to do. And then like take risk as a youth assistant, like do things that are outside of your comfort zone. Play all the silly games. Sign up to do a sermon one night. High schoolers and junior high kids aren't as judgy as we think they are. Especially, towards the end of the summer, I built such a strong relationship with them that like they wanted to see me succeed too.
Yeah. So just some quick organization things. Birthdays.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's like a super easy way to make a connection and like show that the students are cared about. So we sent out birthday cards, and I would do those twice a month. And so we would have a birthday list. That was one thing that we tried to get from every student, was at least a name, a birth date, and an emergency contact number. Like those three things are really important to have. And then twice a month, we would just print out a postcard with happy birthday, have everyone sign it, and then mail it out. And then something I didn't do as an assistant, but do now, is also have like a monthly birthday party at youth. Because that way, if you have visitors and stuff, you don't have their birthdays. That's another way to get it.
Yep. I'm just going to keep doing a couple of these rapid fire, questions there. So birthdays was one. What else is for like social media and stuff?
Mm-hmm.
You have any thoughts on that?
So scheduling those, there's a lot of apps that you can schedule social media posts, which has been way easier for me because a lot of times, like on a Wednesday, I'll get caught up with the event that I'll forget to make a post that day. But on Monday, when you're not as focused on event prepping, you can schedule Facebook to do that. And then also, if you have a kid in your youth group who's really good at social media, put them in charge. If they don't want to play the games, they want to take pictures and make those posts. They're also like way trendier than we normally are. So they can make those connections, and then that's a job for them.
Yeah. And we would, I would sometimes, being that event, that is a way to get those kids who they're not going to do the game, or they're not going to play Winter Olympics or whatever. But they are able to contribute in that way, or run sound, or pick the song list for the playlist, or anything like that, depending on what they were able to do and what they were willing to do, and that kept them involved. So this is a dangerous question to ask, but through your work at Williams, where we were through high school and through being a youth assistant, how did that prepare you? One, being in the group and also assisting with the group, how did that prepare you for doing what you do now?
Well, I think just practically, I met the boss who hired me at my first job. So that was just making those connections. If I hadn't have done it, I never would have met the pastor who ended up hiring me. So that was like practically a huge thing. But
and connections are a big thing. I mean, and so I don't think that's the thing to gloss over. I mean, that is, if you are listening to this, and whether your denomination or your camp or anything like that, if you're wanting to do youth ministry or be youth ministry assistant, making those connections at those camps and talking to people is a big part of that, and being organized when you do it and giving you a good impression. So, they wouldn't have called you at your first official full youth director job. They wouldn't have called you if you had been at a camp or something like that and been like the kid over in the corner, causing trouble and stuff. But they saw what you had done, and they knew your work through being organized and doing a lot of those events. They're like, hey, this person would be good. So sorry to interrupt. I just didn't want to let that slip by without people seeing that is a big deal. So go ahead.
And another way, like just the confidence that I could do youth ministry. It really, being an assistant and like getting to see the behind scenes and everything just like really showed me that I can do this. And then of course, I fell in love with it at that time. I think we were at Lakeview Church Camp, where I was the first time I realized like that this is something I want to do. And so then just being in that space that I could also like ask some like, hard and like weird questions that maybe you don't want to like figure out for the first time as a full-time youth director or as the head youth director, but as an assistant having, it's okay to make mistakes as the youth director, but, it's a little easier to make those mistakes as an assistant and to have a lot of your first as an assistant.
So what was that you would share? What were some of those hard questions that you didn't want to be asked as a full-time youth leader?
I think a lot was like watching how to deal with parents, because that was something that like made me nervous, and too, like working with senior pastors and knowing like what is a good relationship to have with a boss, and just like seeing events fail. We had some events that didn't go well. Either people didn't show up or they were just a hot mess overall. But knowing that like it's okay to try new things, and it's okay that even a huge successful program like Williams still had some failures, and knowing like how to respond to those were some. And then like some of the hard questions too, like I grew a lot in my personal faith. Just sometimes as a youth director, your personal faith is maybe like put to the side because you're so focused on other things, but how to grow in my personal faith and, answer some of the faith questions I had.
And that's, I just want to let you dive a little bit more into that. So how do you, as a ministry assistant, now as a youth leader, because this is a question that's going to be relevant for everybody, because, preparing a Bible study, they tell us even in seminary, like doing my seminary work is not my devotional work. Preparing for a Bible study is not that. So how do you keep that time that you are able to fill yourself instead of just always pouring out?
I will honestly say I have not been the best at that. I'm just kind of now getting, making that a top priority. Just with COVID and being new into youth ministry, I just felt like I had to give it all to other parts. So for me personally, I think it differs by people. You just have to find what's right. I've actually found like a small group that is outside of my like church I work at, church I work at, you can find that group there. But for me, I needed to take a step away. So, people who can challenge me in different ways. And if that's a different, even a different denomination, finding that group of like-minded people, but maybe people for me that were able to challenge me in other ways.
Yeah. And yes, you can find it in your church, but I think you can, if you can get away. And the nice thing is Zoom and other things make this a little easier too. But if you can find somebody or a couple of people who are not related to your church, who you can gripe about anybody in your church and let it go, and know that it's not going to have any chance of affecting how people view you and your job or anything like that. I think that is freeing. You don't have to be so guarded. And
also just, the group I'm in, it has like a separate leader who's like, she's paid to be there. And so, just no matter, as a church employee, even if you show up to another group, sometimes they expect you to lead it, which is great. And something I love doing now, but sometimes you don't always need to be the leader. Sometimes you can grow as much as your faith when you are just an average participant.
Yeah. So being in that role of assistant, like, what do you wish youth leaders knew? Or you can even get personal. And what did you want to tell me? What are some of the things that youth leaders may not realize because we're blowing and going and doing that it would be helpful for us as youth leaders, those who are listening to this, to keep in mind when we do have somebody in that role, whether that is volunteer or a paid position?
I think for me that there was certain, stuff I was really good at. We talked about the organizing part. But that didn't mean that I wasn't willing to do other things or wanted to try other things. So, sometimes, you get stuck in something you're good at that you don't realize that there's more possibilities to learn new things and try new things. And I know, Russell, one thing you did great and I really appreciate was you also supported me on my journey, and you would check up me as a person and ask me the tough questions, how has this affected your will to do ministry? And you would sometimes keep your opinions about events to the side and be what did you think about this event? What could we do better about this event? And so just having that relationship, and then also helping your youth assistant find people to mentor and relate with other than you, whether that's a church member or a pastor, or, Russell connected me with some other youth directors that he knew. So I was able to, talk with someone other than my boss about youth ministry.
Yeah. And that's important, because I know you need, your youth ministry assistant needs to vent about you, because there are things that may not be awful, but that they just like, oh my God, it's just handwriting is awful. I can't read it. And that's just a silly example, but it is good to have, and to realize and to be confident and to know that, you can, whoever they are, whether it's a volunteer or a paid person, can go and get ideas and vent and bounce ideas off, and confide in someone, because really sometimes that may not be the best, healthiest thing is for your youth ministry assistant and you to be confiding as far as personal, because that affects relationships and things. So, all right, I'm gonna give you a little chance to tell, almost think about the story, but just what was one of the funnest and what was one of the biggest fails that we had? Just people can tune out at this time if you want, but from your opinion, what was one of the funnest events?
The funnest, one of my favorite events that we probably did was as a youth, I really liked the Winter Olympics. I wasn't a youth official assistant at that point. And then in the actual, while I worked there, probably was Color Wars. It might have been my least favorite to fill all the socks with color powder. Water balloons used to be the worst, but now they have the things that fill them all at once. Yep. So now I think the youth director terrible thing is socks with color powder. But that's too, like, where I just saw, the kids really like become themselves and like more freedom. Because we did I feel like the activities that are my favorite is the ones where we did games that were organized and then had like a free for all at the end, because you just really got to do that.
Yeah. And then funnest, but worst event ever. Are we thinking of the same thing?
Are we thinking of CFAT?
No, I think it's CFAT. You didn't like CFAT, but I just remember the time that I told everybody, if we had 10 or more people at senior high Bible study, that and this is pre-COVID. Please keep this in mind. If we had 10 or more people at Bible study for so many weeks, we would all go to Sonic, and at that time they had 25 flavors of shakes, and so we went and I do not suggest you put this on your list. But we went and Colleen went. And so how did that go? I gave you the credit card.
Gave me the credit card.
You were a student at that time.
Yeah. If you ever want to make Sonic mad, just tell them over the intercom you like to order all 25 flavors of shake. She answered back, what? And that's at the time that they had like jalapeno bacon. Some of them were terrible. And they brought out all 25 shakes. We're still not truly sure if they made all 25 or just gave up and gave us chocolate for the rest. And then there was probably about 12 of us there, and we all ate all 25 shakes. This was definitely pre-COVID, because at the end of it, I was like, if one of us had the stomach virus, we are all in trouble. Yeah. But that's just something that's a silly memory that I still have. And I even every time I go to Sonic now, I honestly think about, and we went after 8 p.m. So, we took trips to Chicago and, big summer trips that I loved, but just like the silly memories of being at the Sonic at 10 p.m. with 25 gross shakes and something easy and simple that I'll remember forever.
And you can create those in much safer ways. But I think it's the deal is the shared experience. Like that was a shared experience that, and you're going to have shared experiences of, trips that were, may not have been your favorite, but, that you go on that are disasters. Or I remember going to Magic Springs and going to a water park and just a torrential downpour, and we're all huddled in the bathroom for 30 minutes while lightning strikes everywhere. But even your worst experiences one, help shape who you are, help give you things not to do in the future, help you be more prepared in the future for things like that. So yeah, this popped into my head. And sorry for some of y'all who are listening. I'm trying not to take it just completely down memory lane. But I mean, Colleen, I knew you from when you were a sophomore in youth group. And I think that goes to talk about that longevity and the relationships that you build won't be with everybody, but there are relationships that you build that you will have for a lifetime. And you have a role as a youth leader to pour into those volunteers, into those youth, into those people who come through your path for a summer, is that you have a responsibility to make that impact and to teach not just about Jesus, not just about God and faith, but about leadership and working in an environment, and all of those things. So, Colleen, anything else that you want to share with anybody who's listening who is looking to hire a summer youth worker or a youth assistant, or someone who is wanting to be a youth assistant?
I think for both groups, just like to do it for one summer. I also summer intern at a different church, and that church didn't pay me as much, but they provided housing and meals, and so that was something that there's more ways than if you don't think you have the budget for it. And even finding a college student who might have a different job, but you can pay for them to go to a week of camp. And then for anyone who's interested in youth ministry or children's ministry, or, I've been at churches that have had worship interns, all different things, just find a church and ask them, what are things you could do? And if they don't have the intern position, then what are things you could do on a Sunday night? Because the youth director will love you. And then that's also an easy way for you to see if youth ministry is for you.
Yeah. And so I think this is also a reminder, pour into those students. Because again, like I said at the beginning, that was a gift that you had and the willingness that you had. Find those students who are willing to do those things and who are organized, and give them the reins. Turn that over and realize that, yes, if they fail, you'll have to work with them afterwards, but give them the reins, because you're building that confidence. They don't need to wait until they are 18 to lead. Let them lead in roles, and they will surprise the heck out of you, as she did with me. And I've had many others who've come through and just taken roles and done things that you never would expect. But you see how that sets them up for ministry and for jobs and for future. And you're pouring into them, not just faith, but confidence and stuff. So, well, anything else, Colleen? It's been a great conversation. And I know we'll have plenty more conversations, but for this purpose, anything else you can think of?
I think that's it. Just, youth assistant, it's one of the greatest things I did. So even I am using it in ministry, but I also learned, a lot of communication and just built my confidence that would have been helpful in any career field.
Yeah. So, well, that's about all the time we have for today. And so I encourage you to listen to this. Go back and listen. We've mentioned some other podcast episodes in here, and I will make sure and put those links in. I'll also put links to the programs and maybe articles we have about Trello or Remind or any of those tools that we have. Colleen, how can we get a hold of you if someone's wants to talk to you about this, has more questions, or social media, or however? What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Facebook, Colleen Russell. I'm sure Russell will tag me on the Facebook post on this. And then my email is Colleen, Colleen, at whitehouseumc.com. That's my church email. And if you message me on there, I can also share my personal cell phone through either one of those. And would love to talk to you. Or if you have a youth intern for the summer, I would love to connect with them and share my experience.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and we will see y'all next time.
Hey, thanks everyone for joining us today. We hope you were encouraged and inspired by this week's episode and that you found tools that you can use as you pour into the lives of your students.
Yes. And a reminder, if you enjoyed this episode and you found it helpful, we ask that you would leave a comment and a rating on whatever platform you're listening on. We would appreciate that so much. Also, maybe you know someone else who would benefit from this conversation. Take a moment, share this on social media and tag them, and then tag us at Talk Student Men on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Also, make sure and go check out our merchandise and other ways that you can support our podcast financially as well. Now, Brent, we are only a few weeks away from completing our first year of podcasting. And so we have some great episodes coming up in the next few weeks. One of them is your episode next week. So can you tell us what is in store for us next time?
Yeah, so next week I sit down with Caleb Davis, and Caleb is, he's been in student ministry for a while. He's done some worship leading, but now he runs a organization or a website, and he has written a book, and it's basically, the premise behind it is simply love Jesus. And so we are going to sit down next week and talk about evangelism. We're going to talk about not only how you personally work on your own evangelism goals and how you share your testimony and how you share the gospel with other people, but then also how we encourage and equip students to share the gospel and equip them to do the same. And so it's a great conversation, and I can't wait for y'all to hear it next week.
Well, that sounds great, and I am looking forward to that. Just a reminder, to get the show notes from this week's episode and from any episode, just go to studentministryconversations.org and search for the episode number or the guest in the search bar. And there's also other helpful articles and posts and some new giveaways, some freebies for you. So go check that out. Again, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week.